Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site, taking a look at some of the really cool rare prototypes in their reference collection. And among the other things in this collection, well, Springfield Armory did a lot of the investigation into captured foreign military arms after, during, and after World War II. And so they have a really substantial collection of oddball late World War II German stuff, like this bolt-action Volkssturm prototype. Now, this is a gun that's known by a couple of different names. Here, it's listed as the Hisha rifle. You might also know it by the name Coenders. That was the designer who put it together. And you might also know it by the name Rochling. Now, that's Rochling and Hisha. And by the way, let me apologize in advance for all of my German pronunciation throughout this video. They're not just German words, they're German words that seem particularly hard to pronounce correctly. So anyway, Rochling started off as a steel supply company in the 1930s, and they actually did a lot of business with the German government. They were a significant company, but they didn't really do any small arms work. Maybe some cannon stuff, but not small arms. Their chief engineer, starting in 1936, was a guy named August Coenders. I actually have a previous video on a belt-fed machine gun prototype that Coenders developed. That I'll link to that in the description text below. Prior to working for Rochling back in Germany, he had actually worked for Oerlikon in, I believe, in Switzerland, and his experience was largely in 20mm and larger automatic cannons. So this company isn't doing small arms development work until very late in the war, when Volkssturm rifles, Volkssturm small arms, are of urgent necessity. So first off, let me point out that on August 12th, 1944, the company reincorporated, and it went from being the Rochling Iron and Steel Works to being Hessische Werke, Hessian Works. And it did this because Rochling, the founder and the namesake of the company, was a fairly prominent Nazi, but he was involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler, which took place on July 20th, 1944. August 12th, the company reincorporates to scrub his name from their name to avoid association with the now much disgraced Rochling. Incidentally, this would also do them very well after the war, because under their new name, they weren't really recognized by the Allied occupation commissions as being a Nazi-centric firm. And very shortly after the war, they were actually back in business, not doing small arms, but doing other metalworking stuff. Anyway, that's where the two company names come from. They changed it in August of 44. In November of 1944, November 4th to 7th specifically, the German military held a trial for bolt-action Volksgewehr, bolt-action Volkssturm People's Militia rifles. And all of the major companies, arms companies in Germany, submitted guns. Rheinmetall had one, Steyr had one. I guess Steyer's in Austria, but Steyr submitted a gun, Mauser submitted a gun, Walther submitted a gun. They were all being tested. And Hessische, Rochling, also submitted a rifle. Like, they had a small arms guy as their chief engineer. Bolt-action rifles weren't his specialty, as we'll see, but hey, they can put something out. And this is what he came up with: a forward operating bolt-action rifle in 8mm Mauser. So let's take a closer look at it. All right, this thing is definitely on the bizarre side of the scale. It is a forward operating bolt-action rifle. So the bolt handle here, well, the handle is not connected to the bolt, it's connected to the barrel. There is really no bolt. So to unlock it, I lift it up. I can then push it forward. This thing is a little gooey and stiff, but we'll make it work. You push it forward, and you're pushing the entire barrel forward along with the chamber. The bolt, such as it is just a solid block in the back of the receiver. Now, we have a 5-round magazine here with this kind of interesting compound magazine spring. Like, instead of a follower, it just has a 2-part magazine spring that compresses down like that. So it's a V shape out here, and it compresses down like that and then expands up. The follower here pushes the next round up. Once you've fired and open the barrel, the empty case gets pushed out of the action by the next round coming up. Or if it's the last round in the gun. It gets pushed out by the follower itself. We have a little bit of a spring out there and a ridge on the barrel. So when you push the barrel all the way forward, it compresses under this spring so that you're not, you're not slamming the barrel into anything when it cycles all the way forward. Then you would simply pull this back. As you pull it back here, the nose of the round is going to sit inside the barrel. You're going to pull it back all the way over the cartridge, lock it down there. This looks like a big empty gap, but you can actually see the hooks or the rim guide right there. So the case head is held in position right there, and the case extends into the barrel for firing. This is essentially your bolt block. It's a separate piece of steel that can be hardened better quality steel that's hardened to survive acting as the breech block of the gun, where the receiver can be a cheaper, lighter steel. Coenders did give this a pistol grip, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, on this example, the trigger mechanism is missing. These did not have any manual safety. They used a double action sort of trigger. The sights are actually pretty cool as well. The rear sight is this rotating drum that's riveted into the receiver. It's an aperture sight, but there are like 5 different ones on here that you can choose from. And you can see as the range gets longer, that aperture hole moves up higher and higher. So this is the one that you would be aiming through, and it does have a little click thing to sort of lock it in place there. The front sight is just a bead. Note that it's a bead on a rotating screw so that you can adjust the windage side to side. There is a simple metal butt plate on the stock, and that's basically it. The rest of the stock is a little bit on the petite side. It's fairly thin here. The pistol grip is fairly thin and a little bit loose. That would probably be locked in a little better if the trigger mechanism were in there. But on the surface, this seems like an interesting idea. It seems like one where you can save some material and some manufacturing costs by not having a moving bolt and instead just having the barrel cycle. So by the way, here's a view that will show you both ends of the barrel at the same time. There's extraction, feeding, chambering, and then firing. All right, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the internals, do some disassembly here. If I take this screw out of the front, I can pull the barrel out. So that screw holds in this front cap. Underneath that cap, we have the plug and the spring. So this is what centers the barrel in the front of the receiver and prevents it from coming out the front. Now that that's removed, I can take the barrel and slide it out the front of the receiver. Once we have it out, you can see here that the only locking surface on this is the bolt handle, which is not really a great idea for a cartridge like 8mm Mauser, which is what this was chambered for. Standard German Army 7.92 by 57. And so that honestly looks like a sleeve that's been added onto the barrel, which is also not really a great idea. This doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. Now we've got 2 screws holding the stock in place. We've got a cross bolt back here and one up here. So we'll pull those out. There's that guy. There we go. There's that one. All right, now we can very carefully take the receiver out. There we go. There's the stock. And more interestingly, there is the receiver. So we can get an idea how this was actually manufactured. If we look at this a little closer, obviously 2 big welds there. So the magazine and fire control assembly, all the parts of the magazine that stick down into the stock essentially are made out of flat sheet metal. So nice and cheap to manufacture. It looks to me like, yeah, you can actually see it has cracked right there. So they probably bent this whole piece out of one sheet and then added a filler at the front to close it off. If you look down inside there, you can sort of see the breech block right there. That's the breech block. This round section of the receiver looks like it was milled. These cuts made in it. It doesn't appear to be stamped. It's fairly thick in there, and you would want this fairly thick because this has to be strong enough to hold that breech block in place and withstand the pressure of firing. The front half of the tube, however, the barrel shroud, is definitely a piece of stamped steel that has been brazed, there we go, brazed in place. And you can actually just see, you can see one little hole divot right there. So I think they undercut the front of the receiver here and then slid this in and brazed it in place. Same, obviously, brazed in place that screw that locks it into the stock. So that's your only locking lug, locking surface right there. That's obviously another reason that you want this whole thing to be milled. A stamped segment here would not have been strong enough to act as the locking lug with that single locking lug bolt handle right there. So there is the Coenders-Volkssturm, or the Hisha Volkssturm, all disassembled. Certainly meets the, this element of the Volkssturm requirements. Very simple, be very cheap to manufacture, not a lot of parts. The next question, I suppose, is how did it actually do in trials? All right, so in the November trials, performance of Coenders' gun here was abysmal. It was terrible. For accuracy, it was actually the worst performing rifle in the entire trial. It had significant problems loading, so like stripper clip loading into the magazine, as well as feeding from the magazine into the chamber, as well as ejecting empty cases out of the gun. Like I said, the accuracy was bad. It had functioning problems. It broke the rear sight, the front sight, the magazine, and the barrel guide. So most of the significant parts broke during testing. It was terrible. It was not, in fact, formally adopted. As with many of the Volkssturm projects, the records are incomplete. There's not a lot known that survives. It does appear that the local government in Wetzlar, where this company was located, actually ordered 1,000 of the guns, which is understandable despite the horrible trials results, because by this point in the war, transportation was very difficult. If a factory was making a bunch of guns on one side of Germany, trying to ship them to the other side of Germany for a local Volkssturm militia to use was extremely difficult, if not right out impossible. And so even if the gun was really bad, it's kind of understandable that a local local district would order whatever was actually available being manufactured in their district, because that was the only way they were going to get anything. Not clear how many of these were actually manufactured, if it did actually go into production. As far as I know, there are only 2 of them, 2 known surviving examples, or at least only 2 that I've seen documented. This is one of them. Coenders did also prototype a blow-forward semi-auto rifle in 8mm Kurz, which would also be a fantastic thing to get a chance to take a look at. I don't know if any of those survive, and I haven't seen one. That's a subject for a separate video for sure, if I ever do find one. This one, of course, is missing its trigger group, but otherwise in remarkably good condition for what it is. So big thanks to Springfield Armory, to the National Historic Site here, for giving me access to this essentially one-of-a-kind piece out of their collection to film for you guys. They do have a cool museum here with a whole bunch of interesting prototypes on display, a lot of, not surprisingly, a lot of US military equipment and prototypes and trials guns on display at the museum here. So definitely worth checking out if you find yourself in Springfield, Massachusetts. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.